ReZero, a show that triumphs past all its own shortcomings. Long review. 2016's ReZero has cemented itself as an icon of the modern anime discourse. Its initial 28 episode run left a huge impression, with bonus-length episodes, jaw-dropping cliffhangers, and a general air of being a community-altering event. Thereafter, it only maintained itself in the public anime consciousness via the odd OVA piece and chibi spin-off content. Yet nonetheless, the recent split duo of cores that makes up the second season managed to recaptivate the legions of fans and detractors alike, enchanted by this show's explicit grandeur. Today I'd like to take a look at what made this first, almost 5-year-old series so memorable in the first place. There will be spoilers for exclusively Series 1 further down, but ample warning will be given beforehand. For now, please enjoy as we take a spoiler-free look at the show in more broad strokes. Animation and music. ReZero's style has aged exceedingly well, with it effortlessly being able to compete with competitors using an almost unchanged style for its second season. Its hard lines and graphic scenes of gore are only matched by its equally breathtaking landscapes. While not always, this show can often feel like it's being produced with a movie budget, as Studio White Fox pull out all the stops to make these backgrounds look stunning. But does it work? Well, a good production may not always fit the style or tone of a story being told. See my Hajimeru review for more on that. However, in ReZero's case, the style fits to a T. The world we're inhabiting is one of a fairy tale fantasy, but rather than the more placid tales of Disney, it's better akin to the grim-dark realms of the Brothers Grimm stories. As such, the beautiful moments are inspired and the horrific scenes suitably repulsive. It's a pleasure to give the show top marks here, both for its style being fitting of its tale and for being unashamedly fantastic to look at. This of course further extends to the action scenes. The choreography isn't always the most realistic, but I don't think it's meant to be. Instead, we are presented with the fantastical fights and battles of knights, ogres, and all manner of mages, both friend and foe alike. As such, there are moments of questionable physics, but all with good cause. Every swing of a club and slash of a sword carries a real sense of either grace or weight, depending on the wielder. Early on, we see the knight Reinhard break a sword through overexertion, and it feels earned as we visibly see the weight he's putting into said blade. The caveat here is the odd scene where the strange physics go a little too far and ends up looking goofy, but those occurrences are far too rare to be of much note. Additionally, the abundance of CGI can be genuinely painful to look at. However, they do a great job to keep it out of the important scenes, something which the second season unfortunately fails to completely abide to. Overall, there's definitely an argument for ReZero being the best animated and looking TV anime in recent years, with only a few shows even coming near to passing it. Then we have the soundtrack, which I doubt you haven't already heard about. There's some great orchestral pieces mixed in here that feel really full and verbose, while smaller wind instruments accompany many pieces to make for an incredibly grand composition of music. Tact of Heroes is the obvious highlight for the OST, being its most triumphant piece and its easy choice with damn good reason. Similarly, epic is Death Ballad, which has a whole variety of more obscure instruments. It straddles the line between Tact's more victorious feel and the darker, more depressing pieces of the OST that it's well known for, and is very fitting for the many, shall we say, crushing battles of the series. There's also the sad pieces like track 12 and 16, which cut straight to your sympathy bone and make you wish for these characters to finally see a happy ending. Then there's the show's calling card, tracks like Call of the Witch, with their chilling demonic choirs playing to a backing of tension-filled stringed instruments. ReZero is a master of these pieces, but combined with its other tracks as mentioned, and what you have here is a varied and multifaceted soundtrack that is a pleasure to both experience during the show and out of context. Once more, it's a case of top marks. It should also be stated, slightly more off topic, that the voice acting in the show's sub is superb. From guttural pleas of mercy to heart-wrenching cries of anger, this show's cast do one of my favourite jobs in all of anime. If you're unconvinced of that, then rewatch episode 18. If you can come back and tell me you're not impressed after that, then I want some of what you're smoking. The story and characters. So, we've passed over the anime's immaculate production values, but how does the story and characters stack up to that? Well, first let's discuss something seemingly simple. Get it out of the way. You should neither expect or tell others that ReZero is a deconstruction anime. Deconstruction is one of those words that gets heavily appropriated in anime circles, like lolly. Its meaning has changed over time, being distorted. There's nothing wrong with saying Konosuba deconstructs elements of the isekai genre with comedy in casual conversation. However, one, the better word in its specific case would be parodies, and two, you should not say it as a deconstruction anime because of what that implies to your average fan. It gives them the wrong expectation. If you enter a show like Shuffle expecting a deconstruction, you'll be sorely disappointed, as it's not one. Rather, it's a show with deconstructive elements, but its primary focus is not actually breaking down tropes. Similarly, Evangelion is not a deconstruction in the mecha genre, it's just seen as one by a lot of people. Nor is ReZero one for the isekai genre. The thing those three shows have in common is that they all perform within their genres to such a high level of expertise that they inherently expose the flaws in their own ideologies. This may all seem needlessly complicated, but the point is, people who fire hate at ReZero for being a so-called bad deconstruction are rather naively labelling it as one in the first place. As such, the story of ReZero is one of a fantasy adventure. It's King Arthurian in tone, with the central drama of the country being a quest to discover its new ruler, but unlike The Sword and the Stole, with ReZero we're presented with 5 people who can wield Excalibur. An intriguing premise, to put it lightly. The reason the deconstruction tag is wrongfully thrown at it is due to the property's propensity for being brilliant in its storytelling. This is, as I alluded to, a classic story of a knights and noblemen, where the heroes fight great monsters and have tragic backstories driving their motives. However, ReZero does this in a logical sense, asking what the ramifications might be of these circumstances. Many fairy tales have a great witch of godlike ability. ReZero is no different, only her followers are realistic cultists. They see the witch, see how the people fear her, and come to revere her as a god. Likewise, Subaru's story of being knocked down repeatedly is, in my opinion, not so much about discounting the standard isekai wish fulfillment protagonist, but instead about showing what it really takes to be a hero. When Subaru finally succeeds, it feels truly earned. It's actually rewarding for the audience. He truly has to work for his power, rather than just claiming to be a white knight in shining armour. And when he does wrongfully claim such things, the narrative rightfully puts him back in his place. To me, it's less deconstructive and instead just really well written, and as such I find Subaru a highly compelling character to follow. That said, if one were to look at it as a deconstruction anime, it wouldn't be of the isekai genre, it would be of the isekai premise, which is, quite simply, that as an average Japanese otaku, if you had only been born somewhere else to a different family or such, then you would have actually had a much better life and not been a hikikomori niche. ReZero says, no, fuck you. You'd still have to work on yourself, work through your problems, and become a better person. In that sense, I could definitely see the deconstructive angle, but I wouldn't say the show is geared as a constant deconstruction of isekai anime, based on what I said in the previous paragraphs. Other characters are painted in much the same way. Minor characters in particular are this show's best narrative strength. We quickly come to understand each knight for their own pros and weaknesses. Julio is arrogant and proud on the surface, but he has all the bite in the world to back up his bark, and his tough guy persona is more of an act he puts on to aid those around him than anything of malicious nature. Similarly, the aforementioned Reinhardt is suitably noble and endearing, but is also more than capable of being cunning and brash when the time calls for it. My favourite characters from the ensemble of the show are Crush-sama, Rem, and Wilhelm. Crush, like the knights, is a strong woman of authority, with a strict determination to reach her goals, but an underlying wish to help the people around her. Meanwhile, Wilhelm acts as an analogue for the whole show. His story is a classic, a tale of noble retribution, and the struggle to make it to the top, and I love it. It isn't uber complicated, but it doesn't need to be, and it still manages to be plenty nuanced. The primary cast, aside from Subaru, is a little weaker. I'd be remiss not to address that. With that said, it's weaker by this show's standards. Put these characters into most other isekai stories and you'd instantly improve those stories. Their designs are all great and highly memorable. Furthermore, the show is expert at characterization. Whether that's Ram's playful nicknames and coy smirks, Rem's wonderfully animated butter wouldn't melt expressions, or the straight man role Beatrice plays against Subaru, and conversely Puck playing the role of Jester alongside said Subaru's more comedic-orientated antics. These characters simply radiate personality off one another, which is a real strength of good character writing. As mentioned, however, the main cast and story are not perfect, and in large part that's due to time constraint. I'll get to this more post the spoiler tag, but one of the big things holding me back from giving this show the full 10 points out of 10 is its incompleteness. The original ReZero light novel series is exceedingly long, and as such it can sometimes feel like watching the first arc of a Higurashi series, where all the questions are raised and terrible things happen to the cast, and then in the second half we get the answers, except in ReZero's case we don't get a lot of those sorely needed answers. Having watched the first 5 episodes of Season 2 at the time of writing this last year, and at the time of writing or listening to this of reading this now. It would seem a few more episodes and we would have started to see confirmation that those answers do in fact exist. However, having to wait 4 years for season 2 in order to receive said answers, it was just too long. When you're watching the show, it can sometimes leave you feeling in the dark, which would be fine to an extent because that's what the characters are feeling. But eventually we need those answers, and in an appropriately timely fashion. I myself managed to spoil part of the story in the gap between seasons by looking at what I believe to be a seemingly innocuous question, and that incompleteness is definitely the story's biggest weakness. Spoiler-free conclusion. That was one of the longer opening segments than normal. It should now suffice to say that I really love ReZero. It isn't always fun to watch, but that's by design. The production values of this show are tailor-created to fit its story perfectly, and said narrative is engaging and compelling, to the point that this is one of the most binge-watchable shows ever conceived. The characters, though sometimes simple, all serve their purpose wonderfully, and more importantly, with such a big cast, this world feels alive. There are stories going on off-screen all the time that we will never see in the best way possible. While I think the show would have greatly benefited from a longer run, it still presents a complete story in a microcosm. The final episode feels definitive, even if you know there's more to come, and while questions are left unanswered, that is far from enough to ruin the show. Even if you come to find the show painful, maybe you see yourself in Subaru or one of the other characters, you would have to be extremely unaware not to appreciate the amazing creation that this show is, and for that I'd suggest it's a must-watch and a contender for my favourite from this decade. It gets a 9.5 out of 10. Spoilers ahoy, suffocatingly dark. To give some further context, I initially watched ReZero as it aired in 2016, and like I said at the top, it had a buzz around it. I also said that it's a great series to binge, and that's definitely true, as I strongly recall appreciating the production on my first watch way back when, but being actively discouraged by the fact that no episode ever seemed to end on anything but a cliffhanger. Seeing as you did just read through 2,000 odd words of me praising the show, I think it's only right that I should address the experience that the show brings, as after all I consider the experience to be a part of my scoring system. First off, the show is a lot easier on a rewatch. This time I enjoyed the director's cut edition, which I was spurned on to watch by 2 details. 1, the second season was drawing close, and I'd be able to go straight into season 2 this time, and 2, I've given up seasonal watching since 2016, but 2, because of the controversy the series recently atoned due to the YouTube immoralities, I had considered doing a segment addressing that, but I've talked on it a little elsewhere, and there are already more than enough people doing so. As such, let's stay with reality and address the show as it is without outside influences like the alarm going off in my other room. The last point, not the one on the alarms but staying with reality, is important, as the segment title literally suggests. ReZero can be a hard watch. Every moment of happiness seems to be snatched away in cruel fashion, to the point of torture for the characters. So the question becomes, is this a good thing for the story? The answer to that is tricky. Like I said, knowing what's to come with retrospect, I can definitely say the story is grim but not edgy. Not one of the deaths are without purpose. It isn't that perverse, however, when you're watching the show on an episode-a-day basis, or, as we all did originally, an episode-a-week basis, this constant failure can feel drowning as a viewer, which, while uncomfortable, I think is part of the point. In actual fact, I think there's few shows that manage to pull off this tone, and feel in an adequate manner. The anime Mugen no Revius is an all-time favourite of mine, and similarly can be a hard watch. Despite its punk rock-esque soundtrack, it oftentimes opts to play no music at all, and I'd argue its soundtrack is that of the spaceship and the characters that they find themselves on, with all the noise of its whirring engines and the faint buzz of incomprehensible technology playing over the characters, who'll often stare on silently, lost in thought, as they contemplate the seemingly hopeless extent of their situation. It's bleak, and after a while you start to feel a real sense of cabin fever or claustrophobia. And this is what I love about it so much, because that's exactly what the characters in this Lord of the Flies in Space are feeling too. Similarly, ReZero gets to be more and more bleak each time a route comes to an end, in such a way that we feel a small modicum of Subaru's pain, when he breaks in the mansion arc and simply camps out in Beatrice's room for one of the resets, only for Rem to die in his place. It hurts to watch, because it should. When he completely breaks in the Betelgeuse arc, we can understand why. You almost feel fed up. Like the situation is stupidly impossible, and that is until you realise it is. It's been created that way, by design, brilliantly. The same applies to when Subaru lashes out and demands Amelia be grateful to him, except in this scene we're meant to feel what Amelia feels. It's pitiable, embarrassing display, but it's not the end. Even at that point, there can still be retribution. he can still recover from it. And that's why it's so important that on this occurrence, he doesn't reset. In fact, a lot of people like to forget is Subaru never resets after his outburst at Amelia. That remains permanent. We see him through Amelia's eyes, but in a way that disgusts us. We feel for the way he's trying to manipulate her in this scene. It really is a disgust that he feels for himself deep down, and that is point-blank amazing and subtle character writing. ReZero is oftentimes not fun to watch, but it's not really meant to be. It's not always a happy story. Not all stories need to be positive ones, and for that I think this may actually be a highly intentional strength of the show. It can be hard to see that when you're in the midst of it. Oh right, I was meant to be talking about a downside. Let's try a different angle. So many questions. As stated in the spoiler-free area, maybe ReZero's biggest issue is the absolute myriad of unanswered questions, and while I do have confidence that the author is more than talented and hardworking enough to answer these satisfactorily in interesting ways, until we have those answers, your story runs a very big risk of feeling contrived, and indeed that can happen. While I do like how the characters don't feel the need to explain parts of their world for seemingly no reason, like certain other isekais do, indeed, having Subaru learn to read and write, plus engaging with the folktales and history of the country in natural ways is much appreciated. Without an understanding of the world, it can feel jarring. This is in no way to suggest the world building is bad. No, in fact, the world building is pretty amazing. I already spoke a little about the greatly intriguing premise of the royal selection and the wonderfully heroic expanded cast of side characters. But even with all this, some large plot questions are just so vague that you can feel lost. And while again I praise the show's effort to make us feel what Subaru feels, it's a fine line to tread, and too much of this can become tiring. I should give some examples to be more clear. There's two sorts: the type one can theorise about and have fun with, and the ones that simply perplex even keen viewers. Beatrice in the third mansion arc agrees to help Subaru, which by itself seems convenient, but by the end of the arc she's willing to fight Roswell and Ram to defend him, which could be described as downright contrived. This example is fine, as an acute viewer may well pick up on how Beatrice's magic seems similar to what Puck described as Subaru's, which conversely Amelia told us was rare, so we can guess that Beatrice may be basically interested in Subaru in a sort of semi-flippant way, for the simple novelty of another magic wielder of her element. We can also then theorise that she really does mean it when she says she never breaks a contract. After watching the opening episodes of Season 2, I've got far more pressing theories for her keenness on the boy, but I won't put those here. The other type of question, and the biggest of them, would have to be Subaru's power. Its initial vagueness seemed innovative compared to how contemporary shows treated their superpowers, but as time goes on we start to form a desire to properly understand its effects. Again, I'm sure all will be properly explained in due time. In fact, having now, when recording this scene the second season, it does indeed get some great answers. But when Subaru's save points update and the only conceivable explanation is that, I don't know, the witch directly controls them as she pleases at random, but if so, why and how, and again, that's only a guess, it could in fact be totally random. It has seemingly little to do with the passage of time or the character sleeping or his consciousness. His power is intangible, and as such it can feel a little deus ex machina. Furthermore, while it is still no doubt a uniquely interesting power, it's more beneficial than not. Sure, he has to die to activate it, which is obviously unfortunate. But by doing so, he can save infinite lives again and again. Mentally speaking, it must be, and clearly is, horrible. But at the same time, the benefits do outweigh the cons, at least in the short term. This stretches even further into the nature of what he can and can't say. The very fact he can't tell people about his power comes off as a bit cheap, for the sake of making the rider's life easier. However, this is made even worse by the fact Subaru frequently says things that allude to his power, and relatively frequently talks about the power when no one is around. In fact, arguably when he names it, he's talking aloud towards a sales merchant. This all in turn heavily implies the witch only figuratively grabs his heart when he tries to tell other people of importance. But yet, when fighting the whale, and I believe the wolf man beast in the mansion arc, stroke rescue rem arc, he uses the power while he's nowhere near people, in order to save the day. Now, that really does feel contrived. Unless the rule is it activates when he tries to tell people or mar beasts, but if not, he's just mumbling aloud to himself. All this is to say that with a little more information, we'd feel more like we're here along for the journey, rather than a confused bystanders. Other examples include the baffling manner in which the whale's powers function. Does Wilhelm actually remember his wife or only fragments of her? and less important questions like what happens if the whale were to head straight towards a capital city. These aren't mammoth issues, but it could be better in this regard. For anyone, as a PS who hasn't watched the show in a while, when I say he uses his power against the whale, he references when fighting the whale, Subaru says, I can return by death, which causes the witch to do the grabby heart animation, which causes the whale to be attracted to his power or whatever, which he says out loud, but he's not actually talking to anyone at the time, which implies that he can say it towards whales and that counts as talking to people. Anyway, moving on. Teams. ReZero is definitely a show I'd be up for doing some proper study of. However, for the sake of this short review, I'd still like to give mention to a few of the show's well-developed themes and concepts. For one, there's plenty of them, from parallels between Subaru and Emilia about their respective self-perceived roles in society, something which Season 2 expands on in a big way, to its more meta ideas about the fantasy genre. One theme I really enjoy is the continued one that only those who commit effort deserve recognition. It's an interesting one, as generally I'd suggest ReZero disproves of the stereotypes that are placed on men and women in society. However, it isn't saying that we shouldn't have standards. In this, it seems to be vying for the prospect that we should all take personal responsibility to be the best that we can be, but not because of an expectation, instead because we want what's best for ourselves and those around us who we care about. No one expects anything of Subaru. This is a prevailing theme of the show. The idea that Subaru was a loser in his past life, and ergo still is. He at first styles it out, but with each passing death his resolve to be a hero in this new life grows ever weaker. We'll touch on it more in a minute, but this comes to a head wonderfully in episode 18. The point of this theme, to me, is quite clearly to shatter the idea many otakus have that simply being sent to another world will somehow fix your life. That really you're not the problem. It's your surroundings. What's important here is that the show isn't dismissing fantasy outright. It isn't saying that there isn't value in escapism. There are lessons to be learned and stories to be enjoyed, but that sometimes we have to awaken from the dream and face reality. Just come back to what I mean about how the story focuses on effort. The knights of the story do get to be heroic. They do get badass moments saving the day and rescuing the princess, but that's not because they were born in this world, but rather because they put in the effort to earn that right. Alongside a team, this is Subaru's main arc for the first season, learning that you aren't entitled to anything. The world owes you nothing, but you owe yourself everything. You can be whatever you earn the right to be. You can be a hero if you try. It's easy to give up, but it doesn't suit us. Honestly, I'd love to go on further. However, there's already a lot of good videos and essays on the topics of the teams and such to bloat out the length of this overview needlessly. Further, it should suffice to say that ReZero is packed with depth and subtext, which is one of the factors that I think it does so well. Episode 18. Anecdote time. I started a list around a year ago of episodes that stand head to shoulders above the rest. It's by no means a complete list, and I've since completely dropped it, as I'd already seen a mountain of shows at this point. But some pieces sprang to mind as important to add immediately. One was ReZero episode 18. At the time, about 3 years after it aired. This episode has helped with making the show as unique as it is. By this I mean to say that it would still be brilliantly produced and written without it, but with it, it rises to be something more. The decision to have an entire episode be just two characters talking is a bold move, but to do so this far into the season, with borderline no action involved in what is a heavy action property, all while knowing the conversation is going to end with a full-blown rejection of the fan-favourite best girl, is, well, what can I only call it but inspired? I've spoken at length in my light novel analysis of Shuffle about my love of 3 of its scenes, but this one beats them all. Indeed, in what is essentially one long scene, you have the emotional weight of a Gundam 00 episode 23, the character nuance of Full Metal Panic's The Wind Blows Home arc, and the raw emotions that define Canon's brilliance. I'd worried that rewatching this episode it couldn't possibly live up to my memory of it, and yet it does completely. Where do you even start? Quick production stuff would be appropriate, I suppose. You have an instrumental version of the OP playing, which is highly fitting when you consider the contents of the conversation. You also get the wonderful use of the capital, pre-established architecture, and the use of the time of day to frame Rem as both an angel and the sole focus of the screen, in spite of all the other interesting locations available in the background. This scene perfectly manages to encapsulate almost everything the first series of this show is about. Subaru asks Ren to run with him. Elope, essentially, to which she proceeds to decline, while describing a fantasy lifestyle she most clearly longs for. Right here we have the themes of facing reality and earning what you have. Rem describes a picturesque future in another country, going away to another world, if you will, which we know the girl must want so badly at this point in time. But to hide away in that fantasy would be no different from running away. She hasn't earned that right, nor would doing so fix their problems. Just like the anime can't fix her life, Rem and Subaru can't run off together, however nice that might be. Rem goes on explaining that no matter how bad what he's been through has been, no matter what it is she doesn't know about him, she doesn't need to know him. He protests, and like with Emilia, he laments that he can't tell Rem about his power. But unlike then, Rem listens. The moment is long, really long, and Rem is silent throughout, but clearly attentive. The voice acting is just so good. Subaru's crying and Rem's both feel so real that it's unreal. In the end, Rem doesn't leave him. Instead, she berates him, inquiring as to what he could possibly know about the Subaru she knows. This line is an amazing parallel to what Emilia said to Subaru. The Emilia in your mind must be amazing. But Rem is able to go further. She's able to say what Subaru couldn't before, and she demands nothing of him. Instead, she just asks that he let her be by his side. He lists all his worst traits while she lists his best, something he'd repeat in a sense with Emilia in the final episode, proving just how much he learns from this. She wants to earn the right to be beside him, even if he doesn't deserve it just yet. He eventually decides to become the hero she envisions, and in a great, if a little cheesy, piece of dialogue, Rem says the thing. Let us start here, from zero. The swirl, the score swoons, and the whole thing is just enchanting. And then he says it. I love Emilia. It's a sudden moment, and for many it turned him against the series, but I kind of like it. In fact, I really love it. He just dictated that he's going to be a better man, that he's going to be her hero. If Subaru turned full harem protagonist now and decided to keep leading Rem on, then all this 20-minute conversation would mean nothing. Yes, it's heartbreaking to the utmost extremes, but it's also incredibly honest. Telling her like this is the right thing to do. He's starting from zero, dispensing of the faux confidence and the jester mask, and aiming to become a real hero. And the first step in that is treating Rem with the respect she deserves, just like she did when she turned down his initial offer to elope. The writing in this scene is some of the best this whole medium has to offer. It's definitely made me consider reading the novels. In fact, I've already started reading some of the spin-offs. Mind you, it doesn't do all the work, as of course the animation, the music, the direction are all great here too, with the directors and animators in particular doing their best to make Rem the cutest anime girl to ever waifu. You get a front row seat to see me become the most awesome hero. The scene has received mixed reception, but from an unbiased point of view, or as unbiased as anyone can hope to be, it is visually stunning, despite it being two characters standing around for a large body of time, a huge payoff for the show's themes and characters, and an amazing display of the anime's confidence to try new ideas and make bold moves, and for that it's one of my favourite scenes, and one of the best I've ever seen. A conclusion. There's, without a doubt, a whole lot more I could say about this show. Again, if it weren't already done by those far more competent than I'd definitely consider doing a full analysis. I could gush on the brilliant catharsis that comes with the end of each arc, or the clever ways in which the show makes us feel at home and relaxed in the quieter episodes at the start of an arc. Further, it could be damn good fun. When a route is going well, we get what I refer to when talking to the teams of effort and earning. When things go pleasantly, there is a heroic fantasy romp that lets you enjoy some classic otherworldly storytelling. Slaying the White Roll is like the ending of an amazing D&D campaign. Reinhardt versus the Bowel Hunter is visually epic, and watching Subaru team up with Julio to beat Beetlegeist before Subaru sets the bastard on fire and finishes him off once and for all is pure heroic fantasy fun, and I absolutely love it. Like I said at the top of my review, ReZero is not free of faults. The 4+ year gap is the biggest, and had the second season not arrived, it would be a fair argument to say the whole first series was just a really well-produced advert for the light novel. However, you would have to be blind, deaf and dumb not to appreciate the amazing work White Fox put into this production, and the incredible depth and competence of its light novel's writer, Takagi Nagasaki. As my initial title suggests, in spite of preconceived notions of deconstruction, regardless of baseless flack from the likes of neuralities and other pseudo-analysts, or stereotypes levied at it for being an isekai and its fair share of bad CGI, ReZero fights through it all to prove itself one of the finest examples of new generation anime there is, and a worthy candidate for the title of modern classic. I hope you enjoyed listening. Feel free to like, We'll see you in the next one.